on the 27th Amendment, and that one was that anytime Congress gave themselves a pay raise or did anything that would impact them financially, that whatever the law was that they had passed wouldn't apply to Congress until the start of the next session. So that was I think that was the #1 amendment that James Madison had originally written. It wasn't ratified until 1995. From what I understand, I'm not an expert on the history on that, but from what I understand, there's a student that actually dug that up and started pushing for its ratification, and it was finally ratified. The other one, I apologize, right off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly what it was. I'll look it up for next time. But from what I understand, that one has actually been kind of folded in to the Constitution through some other amendments that have been passed over the last 200 years. To give you an idea of the amendment process, the first 10 amendments were ratified, trying to remember now, 1791. So the next 17 amendments were actually kind of spread out over roughly just under a 220-year period. So it's roughly one amendment every 12 years or so. So our founders made the amendment process difficult. So for example, the hurdles that my group is going through trying to convince state legislators to move ahead with a balanced budget amendment is arduous. It's difficult to try to communicate to all the state legislators. But it's our feeling that Congress will never place a restraint upon themselves. Matter of fact, this constitutional scholar, I was kind of posing questions to him, and he made the statement, which I completely agree with, that the only amendments where Congress has actually reduced their power, reduced their authority, were the original Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and when they repealed prohibition. Those are the only two times they passed an amendment that actually reduced their authority. Somebody else had a question? Yes. No questions. Wow. I guess I did okay then. Yeah, possibly.
I would like to ask you, if
yes.
we weren't here last week and we need to get our book, do you have extras tonight?
Roger, or how are we doing on books?
But I've taken a list of anybody that wants it. If you've given me your name, we're ordering it for the next section.
Yeah, we actually have two. I'll sell my copies. I'm gonna order some more. Just people want them. We have 2 copies. If people want to take them tonight.
Yes. Oh, you have my two?
Yeah,
oh, okay. I didn't realize.
So we have 2 copies. If you want a copy to take home, see Richard back there at the back table.
Yeah, Roger can get some additional copies, or if you want to go to Amazon, they're available on Amazon.
So this constitutional amendment, is it already proposed, the wording and everything? Is there anybody in the state sponsoring it?
We're working with all the state legislators. Right now, there's 4 states that are promising that we're working with. Here in Arizona, there's, the Senate President is a little bit leery of going through the process, and from what I understand, there's one gentleman in the House that's kind of blocking it moving forward. There's since the 1980s approximately, there's been a lot of misinformation spread about the Article 5 process, and some of the misinformation is stating that we're going to have a runaway constitutional convention. Well, if you do a search of the Constitution and you put in the words constitutional convention, you won't find any words that match that. The Constitution does not allow for a convention. Article 5 states that that there's 2 ways of proposing an amendment. Congress can do it in the 2 houses of Congress, and I believe it's 2/3 of each house has to approve the amendment. The other way is the states can, 2/3 of the states can apply for a convention for proposing amendments. So it's a very narrow kind of exercise. So for example, the way that we have written, you have to send an application to Congress. Each state has to send an application. So the application will state that the state of Louisiana wants a convention for proposing a balanced budget amendment. So it's very limiting in its scope as far as what they can actually do in the convention.
Bob, the Goldwater Institute, and I'm sure you know this, has written articles
Right.
saying exactly what you said, because what's happening is the progressives that don't want the balanced budget amendment are throwing off these lies. And so I'm sure that a lot of the think tanks, Goldwater, I would imagine, Cato, Heritage, I would imagine, all have articles explaining that what you just said is the truth, and that there is not going to be a runaway convention because the Constitution doesn't allow for it.
This gentleman, the gentleman that wrote the book, has probably done some of the finest work. He just released his third paper of a series of 3 on the whole process, the Article 5 process, and it's being published through Goldwater Institute down in Phoenix. On Friday night, quite a few of us from the convention, or from the summit, went over to Goldwater, and there's a gentleman over there named Nick Duranis, who gave a presentation. And Nick is a gentleman I work with, as well as with Robert Gatelson, and between the two of them, they're some of the foremost thinkers on this whole issue. And they've done quite a bit of research. One of the problems that we're running into right now as far as doing a convention for proposing amendments is during the 18th century as well as the early 19th century, the notion of having a convention was pretty common. It's a tradition that comes from England, goes back into the 16th century English law. Conventions are nothing more than groups of people coming together to talk about typically a specific topic. And so some of the folks that are afraid of the whole convention process, part of their system of fear is that, that it hasn't been done in almost 200 years as far as having a convention within the states. And they don't trust people to be as responsible as the folks were back in the 18th century.
Well, if Constitution isn't, I mean, a convention isn't mentioned in the Constitution, use another word, then it won't scare people.
Well, when you read Article 5, it actually says that 2/3 of the states can send applications to Congress for a convention for proposing amendments. And so it's very, very clear. And during the 1980s, that's exactly what people were doing. We got 32 applications sent to Congress, but we didn't meet the 2/3 threshold, which would have been 34. Now, one of the checks and balances, again, you know, I'm talking more right now a little more about what I'm involved in from a constitutional standpoint. Hopefully this is interesting to you. But the checks and balances. First, you need 34 states to send applications to Congress. And then Congress is then required by law to then call for a convention. Each state that is participating in the convention sends as many delegates as they want. Historically, it's anywhere between 1 and 7, but if a state wants to send 500 delegates, they could. Each state gets 1 vote at the convention. So one of the examples at Goldwater that was kind of interesting, Nick was talking about what if you get to the convention and somebody says, I want a free swimming pool for everybody. I want an amendment that guarantees me a free swimming pool. The person who's suggesting that then has to get all the other delegates at the convention to agree to that that's a great idea. If the state finds out, the delegates are supposed to be representatives of the state, so if the state finds out that somebody's suggesting free swimming pools for everyone, they can actually recall that delegate. So that's another check and balance. Well, let's say out of the convention they vote, everybody decides we want a balanced budget amendment and free swimming pools for everybody. That comes out of the convention as a proposed amendment. Then you need 3/4 of the states to ratify it. So then you have to convince 38 states to actually ratify and turn it into law. Let's say that happens, that 38 states come along and say, oh yeah, free swimming pools for everyone. Well, of course, then you have the check and balance that the states or Congress can then go through the process and actually repeal the amendment just like they repealed prohibition. So there's lots of checks and balances in the system.
Could you have 2 amendments, one which is for free swimming pools and the other one's balanced budget? Or are they limited to have one amendment that has both?
What Robert has written from a historical record, that if you have a convention that's pulled together, that's called for, and let's say it's a balanced budget amendment, and at the convention, people come up with a different idea, that from a historical standpoint, if it isn't within, historically, if it isn't part of the original application, that item can come out as an item of consideration, but it really can't be looked upon as an amendment, or a possible amendment. So historically, it's never actually happened that way. Now we, as a group, we have, excuse me a second. We as a group, we're representing 4 different individual groups that have proposed amendments that we think are noteworthy. Some of those amendments have multiple clauses in them. And so the way that we're handling it, first off, we've done our historical research to understand what an application to Congress, how it should be worded, how it should be written. But then we go ahead and we break down the amendment into its subsections. So they might have one amendment, we actually might address it as 4 different applications to Congress. That way, if one piece succeeds and another piece doesn't succeed, either at the application process or within the convention, then the whole amendment doesn't go down, instead just a part of it goes down. And to give you an idea, my favorite amendment proposition for a balanced budget amendment is one that the Goldwater Institute also is behind. And basically it's very, very simple. It states that anytime the federal government wants to borrow money, they need to get a majority of the state legislatures to approve it first. Which means if there's natural disaster, if there's a war or something like that, they need to go to the states, make a convincing case that it's in the best interest of the nation to borrow money. If the states think it's frivolous and whatever they're asking to borrow money for, the states can then block it. So it takes away, in my view, it takes away a little bit of the central government, the federal government's authority, and puts authority back into the states. So it kind of reestablishes some federalism that's been lost over the years.
What about repealing the 17th Amendment?
That's been one that has been talked about.
Is that part of the 4?
No, it isn't with our group. It has been proposed. There are people out there proposing it. Nobody's actually approached our group as far as including it. We're really open. We feel that any amendment that's viable, we'll go ahead and push it ahead. The ones that we're behind right now, 3 of the 4 are really dealing with budget and spending issues, and then the 4th one is one that is called the repeal amendment that would give the states, if 2/3 of the states come together and vote, they can repeal any law that Congress has passed. So, for example, they could repeal Obamacare.
That's sort of like a nullification, official nullification. But the 17th Amendment is where the states lost their right to select their own senators.
Right.
One more short question, short answer.
With the balanced budget, is there anything to prevent them from raising taxes to balance their budget instead of borrowing money?
The amendment that Goldwater is supporting, as I mentioned a moment ago, is just talking about borrowing only. The other 2 amendments that we're backing have components built into the language of those amendments that deal with spending and taxation. And what they're doing is they're talking about limiting taxation, limiting spending to population and inflation. So it puts a cap on spending growing. My personal feeling, I'd love to see an amendment that kind of caps federal spending per the GDP. So in other words, 18% of GDP. That might be one way of addressing it. I was approached by somebody at the convention who's a big proponent of the fair tax, and they wanted to get that in touch with me because they feel that having the fair tax combined with a balanced budget amendment, the 2 of them work really well kind of side by side for dealing with both ends of the problem. one aspect of taxation is if you cut off Congress's ability to spend, or excuse me, to borrow, there's only so much taxation that the American people will put up with. So in other words, if they try to recoup, trillions of dollars that they've just lost from their bargaining authority, and they try to increase taxes that much, there'd be, pitchforks on the street and torches.
Let's give Bob a round of applause. One thing I'd like for everybody to know is that Bob